the Birds checking in at number 2 behind the Baltimore Ravens, followed by the Detroit Lions, Buffalo Bills, Kansas City Chiefs, Denver Broncos, Washington Commanders, Los Angeles Rams, Cincinnati Bengals, and the San Francisco 49ers rounding at that top 10. And you look at that list, you can make the argument some teams shouldn't be on there. For instance, look, I know the Commanders made it to the NFC Championship game last year, but they have 30 players or 31 players who are 29 years old or older. They have some talent for sure, but I think the age of that roster should either knock them out of the top 10 or bump them down lower. And the Eagles being number 2, I know that the top rosters there are close. They're all stacked, but I think Philadelphia has the most complete team in the NFL. They have star-level talent. They have really good depth. That is combined with a lot of youth on this team, and we're talking about a team that just won the Super Bowl. So you can have some arguments there with you and your friends as to the particular order of those top 10 rosters. As for what ESPN had to say about some of the nuances of this Eagles roster, looking ahead to 2025, let's take a look at the Eagles' biggest strength. It's offensive tackle. No surprises there. ESPN saying that the defending champs have many strengths, but it's tough to beat arguably the league's top tackle duo with Jordan Mailata manning the left side and Lane Johnson on the right. Mailata ranked among the top tackles in Pro Football Focus grade, pass block win rate, and run block win rate in both 2023 and in 2024. Johnson, 35 years old, but hasn't lost a step, ranking top 10 among tackles in pass and run block win rate last year. Lane Johnson also said, "I feel as though I'm just getting to my peak." Jordan Mailata, on the other hand, I thought he should have been a first-team All-Pro last year ahead of Tristan Wirfs because he graded out better, according to Pro Football Focus. And that Eagles offensive line, it's so multiple. It allows you to win in a variety of ways, in a variety of different weather circumstances. And if you need to pass it, you need to throw it, you know that you can lean on this Eagles offensive line. Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson, Cam Jurgens, Tyler Steen, and Lane Johnson. Howie Roseman has built this club into such a strong unit in the trenches, offensive line, defensive line, and as ESPN noted, as we've talked about for months here on this show, the depth along the Eagles offensive line, also fantastic. And as we look ahead to close to the start of the regular season, at the end of training camp, end of preseason, as these teams really hone in on cutting their rosters down to 53 players, if a team does need offensive tackle help, Eagles are a good team to call. Kendall Lamb, Cameron Williams, Myles Hinton, Holland Pierce. There are some really good tackle depth pieces on this Eagles team. And as we know, other teams across the NFL, offensive tackle desperate in some ways, especially some injuries that could occur along the offensive line. We continue to move forward on today's show here. Again, taking a look at how ESPN gauges some of these rosters across the NFL, including Philadelphia's. Eagles' biggest weakness here, it's edge rusher Josh Sweat leaving in free agency, Brandon Graham retiring, Bryce Huff getting traded. They're all gone. So it leaves Nolan Smith as the only established player on the depth chart. Smith is likely to be joined in the starting lineup by 2024 third-rounder Jalen Hunt, who was a solid backup as a rookie. Then the Eagles made some offseason additions / bring in some journeymen. That includes Azeez Ojulari, Joshua Uche, who will compete for work. And I think that Ojulari, Uche, they can serve as some pretty good depth pieces for this Eagles edge rusher rotation. Ojulari, when healthy, been able to get after the quarterback. Uche, an analytical player who a couple of years ago did have double-digit sacks, but hasn't been able to return close to that form. But you think about Nolan Smith and Jalen Hunt going into 2025. These are young players who last year we saw some terrific strides from them. They're both different players in a way, but they really produced in the playoffs, and for Nolan Smith, really it was all year, but he really started to turn it on toward the end of the regular season. And then Jalen Hunt was so good and so effective for Philadelphia, he made Bryce Huff an afterthought. He made Bryce Huff an afterthought to the point where the Eagles didn't even have him in that edge rusher rotation. He was a healthy scratch in the Super Bowl. But the thing is, with this Eagles edge rusher spot, we've talked about it all offseason. The Eagles have a lot of talent there, but it's quote-unquote unproven. We're banking on Nolan Smith to continue his development. We're banking on Jalen Hunt doing what he did at the end of last year, carrying over into 2025, and that being the player who he's going to be all throughout 2025. We're hoping that Azeez Ojulari can stay healthy, because when healthy, he's been very productive. But he's had some injury concerns. We're hoping that Josh Uche is going to be able to tap into the player who he was a couple of years ago. I know that Lane Johnson had said, this guy has a lot of twitch. He has a lot of bend. I've seen it. I've gone up against it. He's a really solid player. A lot of these things, though, are what ifs. So Philadelphia, as compared to prior years, when you know what you're getting from Joshua, you know what you're getting from Brandon Graham. These are unproven commodities at a very important position, and that's why the Eagles have been linked to a lot of these edge rusher trades. ESPN on the Eagles' biggest X factor, guards Tyler Steen and or Kenyon Green. Last year's offensive line reclamation project, Mekhi Becton, left in free agency, yielding a projected 5th-round compensatory pick for the Birds in 2026 per over the cap. But questions do remain. Who will fill the void at right guard? Can offensive line coach Jeff Stoutland continue to work his magic? If the answer to the latter question is yes, then Philadelphia should have a stout line across the board yet again. And thinking about right guard, this is Tyler Steen's job to lose. If he doesn't win the right guard role, it's a bad job by him. He's had every opportunity and will have every opportunity to earn this role. He had that opportunity last year. He got hurt, Mekhi Becton seized it. But now that Becton is gone, the Eagles used a 3rd-round pick on Tyler Steen, a former offensive tackle at Alabama and Vanderbilt, graded out very well in the pre-draft process, had a fantastic relative athletic score. Great. Now last year, when he had to play, he didn't grade out well, according to Pro Football Focus, but as far as the sacks allowed, the pressures allowed number, those were pretty good numbers for him. And at his size, with his athleticism, with Jeff Stoutland coaching him up, the fact that he's going to be flanked by Cam Jurgens and Lane Johnson if he wins that role, the opportunity is there for him to seize this opportunity, and the opportunity is there for him to solidify himself as a really good player in the National Football League. And I think when it's all said and done, it's going to be Tyler Steen starting at right guard week 1 against the Dallas Cowboys. And then lastly, a non-starter to know for Philadelphia, quarterback Kelee Ringo. Ringo hasn't gotten on the field much since the Eagles took him in the 4th round in the 2023 draft, says ESPN. He played only 10 snaps or more in 3 games last year, but he has shown some promise in limited playing time, with above-average coverage DVOA in both years that he's been in the league. He's got the physical tools, 6'2", 4.36 speed, but he's inconsistent. If veteran Adoree Jackson falters, Ringo could earn the starting spot, replacing Darius Slay. Of course, this will be a marquee training camp battle. Obviously of note, ESPN here does not have Kelee Ringo as a starter opposite of Quinyon Mitchell. More on that in a moment. But I think this is also his job to lose. Clearly, with what the Eagles have done this offseason, they're banking on this youth movement. They're banking on these young players continuing in their development arcs, and they're banking on this coaching staff maximizing these players. Tyler Steen at right guard, Kelee Ringo at corner. You're hoping that either Sidney Brown or Drew Makuba can earn that role opposite of Reed Blankenship at that safety spot. Ringo does have the traits. Great size, great physicality, fantastic speed. ESPN knocking him on his inconsistencies, but his playing time has been inconsistent. Hard for a player to be consistent if they're not steadily on the field. Got to give Ringo credit where credit is due. Last year when he had those opportunities to play, I thought he played well. And then he really maximized his role as a special teamer for that 3rd phase of the game for Philadelphia. Now coming up next, some surprises to Philadelphia's depth chart from ESPN. Going into training camp in Devontae Smith, who can slice you up and beat you in a variety of ways. I do expect Jahan Dotson to have some growth this year. He's more acclimated with this offense. Now, wide receiver 3 for Philadelphia, never going to put up big production because you have Brown, Smith, Dallas Goedert, and Saquon Barkley. So you become weapon number 5, and Jalen Hurts is a running threat. But I do expect Dotson to have a bigger role this year, and he's coming off a really good spring. The 2 top tight ends on this team, Dallas Goedert, coming back on that reworked deal. Grant Calcaterra going into the final year of his rookie contract. He's a pretty solid backup. He's not the blocker that Goddard is, but he's a really gifted pass catcher and athlete. And then along the offensive line, no surprises except for one. The aforementioned Tyler Steen, not in there at right guard as a projected starter from ESPN. You have Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson, Cam Jurgens, and Lane Johnson as 4/5 of that offensive line. But Matt Pryor, one of the big surprises there. Now, Matt Pryor was an original draft pick by Philadelphia. He played guard. He played tackle. He was dealt to the Colts. Played okay there. He did fare pretty well last year with the Chicago Bears. Looked at as a kind of cheap journeyman pickup by Chicago. The Bears had a bevy of offensive line issues trying to protect Caleb Williams, one of the worst offensive lines in football. Matt Pryor wasn't really a problem. Graded out okay, according to Pro Football Focus, an overall grade of 69.9. Nice. Pass blocking grade of 78.1. Run blocking grade of 65.9, excuse me. Did give up 7 sacks and 7 penalties. I think a lot of that an offensive scheme issue, and then the surrounding parts around him, not very good. I think if Pryor were to lock down the starting job, he'd be a serviceable player. But you know what you're getting with Pryor. As far as Tyler Steen, you know what you're getting, but there's so much more upside there as compared to Pryor, who's a known commodity as a veteran. If Tyler Steen doesn't win this job for the 2nd straight year as a former 3rd-round pick, it would be a big L for him and Philadelphia with where they drafted him and the fact that they've given him all these opportunities to lock down that right guard role. I know that he was a college offensive tackle. He's more of a professional NFL-level guard, and I think that he can be a solid player, but he has to earn it. What Howie Roseman always does, he leaves no doubt along the offensive line for Philadelphia. If there's a question mark at guard, like Tyler Steen, it's like, okay, let's bring in Matt Pryor. Let's draft some players like Cam Williams, a Myles Hinton. They can play tackle. They can also slide inside to guard. You have Jeff Stoutland, the best offensive line coach in the NFL. I expect him to maximize Steen, bring out the consistency in his game. That's something that Jason Kelsey said earlier this offseason, that Steen has high highs, he has low lows. He just needs to be more consistent. And now that he's entering a critical year for himself, year 3, I think this is a year that he finally puts it together, and I don't think Pryor starts week 1 against Dallas. The projected starters on defense, Jalen Carter, Moro Ajomo, Jordan Davis at defensive tackle. No surprises there. I think Moro Ajomo helps to replace Milton Williams. In fact, I think that he can play better than what Milton Williams did last year. Then at edge, you have Nolan Smith and Jalen Hunt. We obviously talked about them at length a little bit earlier. At the linebacker spot for Philadelphia, Zack Baun, linebacker 1. All-Pro last year alongside Fred Warner, a finalist for Defensive Player of the Year. ESPN has Nakobe Dean penciled in there as linebacker 2. I don't think there's any way that Nakobe Dean is going to be ready for week 1. He tore his patellar tendon in January. That is a long, difficult, arduous recovery because of everything that the patellar tendon includes. It's the knee, it's the quad, and there's a lot of strength and conditioning that goes in, and the recovery process is very difficult because you can't really do a lot with the quad and a knee. That's why the recovery timetable is so long and arduous, as I mentioned. So I think in week 1, starting alongside Zack Baun, you're going to either see Jeremiah Trotter Jr., Jahad Campbell. I think those are the 2 players, unless Philadelphia makes a free agency acquisition like a Kaiser White. But a good opportunity for either Axman Jr. going into year 2 or Jahad Campbell going into year 1. And we'll see if Campbell starts camp on PUP or if he's full go. We've seen some workout videos of him during the offseason working alongside Andrew Makuba. He's been doing some rip moves with that shoulder, arrow pointing up for his injury status. And then we shift gears to the defensive secondary for Philadelphia.
The Philadelphia Eagles are heading into camp with a different kind of buzz. Not about who's coming back, but who's stepping in. ESPN just revealed a surprise starting lineup that changes the shape of Philly's offense. And if these names stick, it tells us everything about how the Eagles plan to strike this year. Let's start where everyone expected. Jalen Hurts remains the face of the offense. He's locked in at quarterback. After a season that saw flashes of MVP-level execution, the expectation now is consistency. He's healthy, has weapons, and the new OC knows how to scheme around a dual-threat leader. Behind him is the first new headline, Saquon Barkley. Yes, they have him as the starting RB. That's no shock in name value, but it says a lot about how the Eagles might use him. This isn't just ground and pound. Barkley gives them pass game versatility, so you can expect motion and matchups. At wide receiver, no surprises in the top two. A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith stay at the core. Surprisingly, Paris Campbell is listed as the WR3. That's a change, indeed. Last season, that role rotated. Campbell, a veteran with straight-line speed and inside-out flexibility, now steps up. This suggests the Eagles are leaning toward three-wide sets from the jump. And then came the tight ends. Dallas Goedert was always going to start, but they have CJ Uzomah slotted in too. That changes the formation logic. This points to 12 personnel being more than just a red zone wrinkle. It could become a core part of how Philly balances the spread with protection. Hurts gets 2 checkdowns, the backs get space, and the receivers get isolation. Stack it together and it's a flexible, pressure-based attack. However, offense doesn't start with skill positions, but the 5 up front. Jordan Mailata holds his place at left tackle. He anchors one of the most consistent pass-protecting units in the NFC. Why does this matter? Well, because if Barkley's going to run outside zone and Campbell's going to be used in motion, it's Mailata who has to seal the edge. Depth remains a question beyond the starting 5, but the projected unit looks cohesive, which means Philly's aiming for tempo early in the season. So why is this lineup a surprise? Simply put, it reflects philosophical changes. This group emphasizes positional flexibility, speed in the seams, and backfield diversity. Paris Campbell getting the Bore 3 nod isn't a depth chart fluke. It means Philly is thinking about spacing, not star power. And Uzomah in the lineup points to more play action and more 2 tight end looks to freeze the second level. Even Barkley's presence suggests a tilt toward mismatch offense. There's also a subtle nod to how the Eagles plan to adjust without Jason Kelce. If they want protection schemes to simplify, extra tight ends, and more shotgun help. On the other hand, if they want quick options, slot-heavy looks with Campbell. This entire lineup is structured to support Hurts before the snap. So yes, on paper, this lineup feels new, but it's not bold for bold's sake. It's layered. Now, what does this mean heading into camp? 3 vital areas. Number 1, if Campbell clicks early, he cements that WR3 role. If not, we could see rotation again. Quez Watkins, maybe even rookies. Number 2, Barkley's usage in the pass game. Look for alignment. Does he line up wide? Does he motion out of the backfield? That'll reveal if this is Barkley the runner or Barkley the matchup problem. Finally, number 3, the Uzomah-Goedert pairing. Will both play in base sets? Well, practice snaps will tell us how genuine that 12 personnel prediction is. The surprise lineup doesn't scream controversy, but it whispers adaptation. Philly's not chasing highlights, but building function. And that makes this training camp more revealing than most. So if you're tracking every rep, every roster shift, and every audible Hurts calls at the line, subscribe. We're just getting started.